Right, so welcome to this week's Philosophy Club. We've just had the 1st of March yesterday, so it's the 2nd of March. And that was St David's Day, so the first thing I want to share, a little summary of the week is, yes, St David is the patron saint of Wales, where I lived for nearly 10 years. I know and love Wales well. And had a phone call from a friend in Wales, so it's he was an important saint, so we honour his memory this week. And I'm going to do a little summary of the week's events here in the world, like I normally do, and share some of the interesting things that I've been up to, and then we'll do the periodic table of the religions, and we're going to choose one from the 99 Names of Peace as well.
Yes.
And then finish with the Tarot of the Gods. So it's a sort of little sequence we do. So what have I been up to this week is I'm writing the 14th edition of the Love Journal at the moment, which is my Institute of Peace Studies flagship journal. It comes out, it's in its 14th year. And I've been researching a lot to do with different muses. This week I've been doing Cleo, who's the muse of history. And I revisited my old centre at the Institute of Education, at the University of London, called the Institute of Historical Research. And I used to use it, as a base in London, and my post was there, and used to go to lectures and seminars when I was doing my PhD in history. Anyway, they've got a really good project going called History and Policy, which I was listening to a brilliant hour-long webinar they recorded, which is professional historians, giving advice to politicians, policymakers, diplomats and civil servants, mostly in the UK. It's a London-based British institute set up after World War I, actually, by a chap called Professor Pollard, who was an expert on Tudor history. And so it's a chance for professional historians to go and advise government and cabinet members and about what lessons can we learn from history that are relevant today. So, for instance, during the pandemic, they were giving advice about how former generations have dealt with mass pandemics and what might help shape policy now. I imagine, anyway, there's some very clever historians involved with this project, and it's nice to see history being used in that way.
Beautiful.
I've always just assumed that's why one studies history, but in terms of actual formal input to policymakers, it's, this is one of the few bodies that actually does it in the UK. I don't know what they do in the USA. I'm not convinced that Trump and his cabinet have much grasp of history, either as a discipline or as, exemplary for policy. Some of the things he was saying in the Zelensky attack just showed his lack of knowledge of history. He didn't study the liberal arts, he studied business and economics, and that's his mindset. So I just wanted to share that. The other thing I've been doing is we had our bi-monthly meeting of the World Intellectual Wisdom Forum and the Institute of Peace Studies and Global Philosophy on Friday, the 28th of February. It was actually a really good meeting. We had, some really interesting discussions about, firstly about Ukraine, Russia, the war, Trump, etc. Everyone gave their views in a measured way. Several people were joining us from America, and others from Ireland and me in France. We discussed what legal remedies people have against the Trump sort of growing dictatorship. So there were many interesting questions. Obviously all the stuff that's come out recently about he might have been a Russian asset over many couple of decades at least, you would have thought that that's illegal under American law to have a senior figure running the government who's actually a Russian spy, which is effectively what the evidence points to. So it's a question of like legal thinkers need to get their heads together and look at the consequences of that. I was saying in the meeting that if it happened in Britain, the Queen or the King would sack the guy immediately because we have that constitutional setup. In America, they don't have that higher tier, which is a problem because it means a dictator can sneak into power in this way. And because of the way that the media, the social media is now such a big opinion forming thing, you can create a sort of dictatorship, without anybody really knowing. So this is a whole new ball game we're into. Then we discuss the implications of this for European peace and security. Obviously, Europe wants peace. We don't want, war. But on the other hand, Ukraine has the right to self-defense, and it's a sovereign nation, and it was attacked. And so the European position is that we should assist its self-defense. Other people were saying, no, we should just cut all the aid and let's have Ukraine can sink or swim, and let's be neutral. But we also discussed the question: at what point does neutrality become collusion? If there's a fight goes on in the street and you see three big guys beating up a little guy, you'd want to intervene and help the little guy if he's being beaten up severely. And if you stand there and say, no, I'm neutral, and some people would, that seems to go against one's instinct for fairness. And I know in Britain I was brought up to believe in fair play, in sort of rules of etiquette and ethics. And I used to play cricket. We would say if somebody did that, that's not cricket, meaning it's not ethical. So anyway, interesting discussion. My Irish colleague Sean English wants Ireland to be strictly neutral, not join NATO. I actually agree with that. I think that's brilliant. With my Irish hat on, I think Ireland should be neutral, but it should become a force for peacemaking. And I've written to the Irish Prime Minister saying, great, stay neutral, but please set up an institute for peacemaking, get a Minister of Peace in your government, and house the European Union Mediation Service, where you can be strategically and actively peacemaking. There's a difference between being neutral and just doing nothing and watching Ukraine get pulverised, or doing active peacemaking. And I think that's what the Irish could and should do. So we then pivoted and discussed the Middle East. We had a very, deep discussion about Palestine, Israel, Gaza, Hamas. And we were joined exactly on cue by our friend in Bethlehem, Mazin Kumsier, who runs the ecological centre in Bethlehem for Palestine. He's a green activist, and biodiversity guy. His centre there is part of the World Peace Gardens Network. He's an amazing jewel of a guy, and he's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I think he deserves it. He's a man of non-violence, He was saying we had a good discussion about the hostages. Apparently the last batch has just been released by Israel, finally. He said a lot of the hostages that have been released have been showing evidence of torture. They're traumatised, they've been kept in prisons in Israel and tortured. And everybody, is just decimated. He has friends in Gaza who've been ringing him. It's just Ramadan started, so they were all getting ready for Ramadan. Normally that's a celebration time, and they have a big feast the night before Ramadan starts, but there's hardly any food. So my heart goes out to them all. We discussed what more we should do, and James Thring, who joined us from Sussex, said, it's funny, isn't it, that back in the 2000s, the UN was full of this concept of the responsibility to protect. That was a slogan that was used in the UN by Tony Blair to intervene in civil wars in Africa, and also in Kosovo, where NATO, if you recall, went and intervened against Serbia, under this idea that the big powers have the duty to protect little people that are being beaten up, like in that street scenario I shared. And James thinks that should be invoked now, that the international community, have a duty to protect the Palestinians, and if necessary through a peacekeeping force. The UN, nations like Turkey, Canada, many UN nations would contribute to that, Norway, etc., could go in and help and just like protect these civilians. I mean, it should. I've been calling for this from day one. It should have happened at the very beginning of this war, and then 40,000 people wouldn't have died in the way they have. So we talked about all that. I mentioned the Al Jazeera film made by my nephew Dan Davies, showing the Israeli arms industry, which is now, the world leader in surveillance equipment and drone warfare. Very invasive. And watch that film if you haven't seen it. 2 parts. It's on Al Jazeera. It's now on YouTube. And they're also exporting this technology to India, which, so all Indians should watch this and realise Modi has been in bed with Israel for this weaponry. So he can then attack the Kashmiri Muslims. And that suits Israel's game plan, which is to turn everyone worldwide against the Muslims. They're the demon race that we have to target. And hey, buy some stuff from us, we'll help you track down your angry Muslims. Well, my understanding, I've only met really amazing, nice, loving Muslims in my life. I used to teach at the Muslim College with Dr. Zaki Badawi, a great scholar, and I think this whole demonising of Islam is a false red herring, and that it's just, actually it turns out it's just to sell weapons. So I think that should be opposed. We talked about that, honestly. We discussed philosophically what is really going on here, and I have friends in Israel, they're terrified of Muslims, and so they have all these walls and barriers and drone surveillance spy things because of fear. So we ended up talking about what is fear, why are we all afraid of each other? Why are Muslims afraid of Israelis? Why are Israelis afraid of Muslims? And vice versa. And I remembered the saying of Christ, perfect love casts out fear. It's in the New Testament. We ended up discussing what is perfect love. How could that, be invoked? What would we do now? How could it cast out this fear? So anyway, it was a great meeting, and it was recorded. I'm going to post it on this channel, when I get round to downloading and uploading it. It always takes a bit of a backlog. Okay, and then, so I also went to collect my friend Inga Mehta, who arrived, who's been in Paris. Do you want to introduce yourself and say a bit about your conference you went to? Sounds very exciting.
Yes, thank you. I went to Forum on wood construction, and it's a strategy for climate 2050, as the French call it. And it's not only, it was mostly Germans, Swiss, and French construction and architects. So, and I was also part of the team that makes the tier of medallas.
Right.
And it's a beautiful wood construction in a smaller installation. The main art of piece in Grand Palais in Paris. It was beautiful and unique, and also this is connected to our work in India with the international school of Devi Sansthan, Sunita Gandhi. And we
in Lucknow.
In Lucknow,
right,
where they're making a new school and a new playground. So the French team has been in India, and they've been cutting wood to make this in a bigger size in India.
Right, fantastic.
So that was fantastic to be part of, and much to say, but let me keep
it
it short.
Lovely.
Yes.
Lovely that you were able to then come and visit from Paris.
Oh
and
yes,
join our
it's
little centre here.
special to be here and talk about the peace.
Yeah. And you were also meeting with another French intellectual who's written some books. Maybe we'll talk about that another meeting once I've had a chance to read the books.
Yes.
Irene,
oui.
Yeah. Old school.
Old school, actually.
And we hope to maybe run a philosophy club in Paris. Is the gist of this.
Oh yes.
We might try and go and, occasionally meet in Paris, which would be good. Yes, get the old salons working.
We have a salon too.
Okay. So I just want to finish my little thing, and then we'll do the periodic table. So my friend, my dear friend Sachin Raja from Canada is currently touring India with a bunch of colleagues, and they've been visiting Sarnath. He posted a talk he gave in Sarnath, which I've been to, which is where Buddha gave his first ever sermon. Buddha was faced with the impossibility of conveying enlightenment. After he reached enlightenment, he felt, I can't communicate this to people. So he was tempted to just go and live in the forest and retire and live in secret. But his conscience said, no, I should share this. So he walked to Sarnath and gave his first public sermon, which is a very famous event. It's called the Turning of the Wheel of the Law, because it's the law of Dharma that is inescapable for all of us, and he was showing what this involves. Anyway, it's lovely that Sachin was there. He was giving a sort of impromptu teaching, and I went to Sarnath too, and did the same, but you know, to the muses. I've also been taking part in a Liberal Democrats European gathering about the recent German election results. We've had a new government elected in Germany, which is more right-wing, sort of centre really. It's the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats hopefully will do a sort of coalition. The new Chancellor is probably going to be this chap Merz, who seems quite a centred chap, and I don't think the policies will change that much, but the disturbing thing, of course, is the rise of the extreme right, the AfD, and I think, and I learned on that Zoom call that they've all been using TikTok. They spread the message of racist hatred of the other and immigrants and all that through TikTok posts, and all the younger generation are hooked into TikTok.
Yes.
And what I don't understand is why Europe permits this stuff. A lot of this is coming from Russia, and it's literally cyber warfare they've been conducting against Europe's. I suppose they don't like our tolerance of minorities. They don't like our liberal traditions, and so they try and play this racist card. And this happened in the American elections. I think it's how Trump and co got elected. Well, I think it's time to review our tolerance of intolerance. And although I'm a member of the Liberal Democrats and a liberal person by nature, I don't think one should tolerate intolerance. And I said in the meeting that I felt I come from the tradition of Gladstone, who was the greatest Liberal Prime Minister we ever had in the 19th century, great friend of Queen Victoria. When he died, he left his library to the nation as a centre for divine learning. He was a Christian and a scholar. He was a friend of Schliemann, who discovered Troy, and he was a real scholar, old Gladstone. And I've sat in his chair in St Daniel's Library in Wales, where we had a meeting called The Educational Implications of 9/11.
Yes.
In November of 2001, after those tragic events, where Prince Frederick came and others, including Jane Goodall, the kind of chimpanzee expert, she spoke at that event. So, you know, my respect for Gladstone is why I'm sitting on this council for the Lib Dems and doing my bit. I also watched, obviously, like all the world, many of us, with horror, the debate going on in the White House, Zelensky, Trump and Vance. I watched it carefully and I've read the transcript of what happened. It seems to me, and I go back to Claire Polinsky's psychological profile of Trump. She described him as a pathological narcissist. She based that on the original invention of the concept of a narcissist by Freud, meaning somebody that is only interested in their own viewpoint and literally won't listen to others. And then is very aggressive and shouts people down and all that. And I've met people like that. They're scary. And when they have power, they're really scary. And it seems to me that we saw that in Trump, manifested 100% in front of the world. I thought Zelensky conducted himself with gravitas and dignity. And, you know, and it's interesting that, of course, all the kind of right-wing or semi-right-wing websites all say, no, it was Zelensky started it, and they're all saying, no, it was all his fault. Actually, it wasn't. I've read Timothy Snyder's study of this, and I greatly respect him. And he analyses it in detail. And he says it's wonderful that Trump has now come out and exposed what he actually thinks, which is really just this pro-Putin propagandistic line. Now, my view on the chatter on the right-wing bots that all say Zelensky's evil, we've got to show him the door. This is Putin-inspired infiltration of our media space, our social media space. And we should never forget the work revealed by the Canadian in his book, Mind, F-U-C-K, when he revealed how it's done on Facebook. And they gave them the mechanism, Cambridge Analytica, to Russia, unwittingly, when we thought Russia was an ally, just innocently. And now they've turned it and used it to infiltrate. And that's where all this stuff comes from. And they've got like 5,000 full-time workers in Petersburg and elsewhere doing this professionally. We're just a bunch of amateurs. People like me, we're just amateurs in comparison. Spreading love, light and peace. So I think that's why Anyway, the other thing I want to report, and then we can move on, is I also attended the Belfer Centre, which has this annual lecture on nuclear security and diplomacy. Belfer Centre at Harvard University is a very good little hub of intellectual work on peace and so on. It's in the Kennedy School of Government. And they had a talk by the former Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dr. Dmytro Kuleba, who's a lovely young man. He's the youngest ever Ukrainian Foreign Minister. He spoke brilliantly about the dilemmas. What should Ukraine be doing? What can they do? And I don't agree when Trump sort of snarls at Zelensky, you have no cards. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say to the head of a visiting country. It's not true. It's a bullying kind of statement. In my view, that kind of stuff should be done in private. It was wrong to have this sort of public thing.
Wouldn't be good television, though.
It's just wrong to have it as a public television show. But Trump is a television guy.
You heard Trump state at the end of this is good television.
Yeah. It's like he's just doing a performance.
I think so. He sort of got Mr. Vance to start up the whole row on set and waited until it was his time to shine.
As if they'd done a script beforehand. But I think that's shocking, and the guy should be told actually being a president requires a certain gravitas and a certain genuine diplomacy. He was treating it like his talk show. But Kuleba anyway said, look, we want peace. Ukraine has been pleading for this ever since Russia invaded. And even before that, when they just were in the Crimea, many deals were put forward, many ceasefires were signed, and Putin broke them all. Apparently 22 ceasefire deals have been broken. And what he said is, from my analysis, going through what the speeches, they analyse everything Putin says in public and all that, and possibly even get access to private stuff. What he wants is the total, absolute destruction of the Ukrainian state as a government system, as a nation, independent nation. And that's his goal. However long it takes, he'll invade. I mean, he's happy to have a little ceasefire now, but he will come back and then grab more. And so what Kuleba was saying is, so what are we supposed to do about that? If I don't know, if Finland invaded Sweden with the aim of destroying the Swedish state and government, I think they would resist it, quite rightly. I mean, it is against international law to invade other states. It's absolutely in the Constitution of the UN, and states have a right to defend themselves. So it's been quite a busy week. Meanwhile, back in the study, I've been continuing with my commentary on St. Matthew, the Gospel of St. Matthew, which I'm now on to page 250 out of 800. And people say, why bother with scholarship? Why bother with a gospel? How boring. No, I don't agree. I think, and I've just been doing commentary on the Lord's Prayer, And I've been researching the fact that this great Polish philosopher called Trzaskowski, who was a student of Hegel, a left Hegelian Polish intellectual, wrote a 9-volume commentary on just the Lord's Prayer, which was published in English by a Canadian professor, and it's never been fully translated. So my commentary is tiny in comparison to his. But he said, and he published, the Canadian guy published this in 1919, saying, and it's called What the Nations Want, taking a phrase from Trzaskowski, and what the nations want is peace. The Canadian guy had lived through World War I and the horrors of it, and he saw Trzaskowski's interpretation of the Lord's Prayer as a glimmer of hope, because he devotes pages to just Our Father in Heaven, say. What does that mean? What does he mean by heaven? What does our mean? Why Father? Why not Mother Goddess, etc. So it's a really detailed look, and my little commentary is nothing in comparison, but what I'm doing in this commentary is showing all kinds of parallel texts. I'm trying to get inside the mind of Christ and see where he got his ideas from. And I've therefore commented on the Psalms of Solomon, which was a text Christ, I'm sure, read, which has God as Father, it has a lot of the phrases. I've commented on the Book of Enoch, which I'm sure Christ read. We know from the Qumran Essenes that they were reading it, and John and Jesus certainly had links to Qumran. So nobody's ever attempted this before. It's a historical, critical, transpersonal history, analysis of the gospel to tell us what Christ actually intended. And it's fascinating. What I'm doing now is spell checking and correcting. The actual text is written. So I think it's worth doing, and I hope people will enjoy it when it's finally published later this year. Okay, so there we are. That's what I've been up to. Any comments, feedback, or anything you want to share that you've been up to?
The beginning of the week I was back home in Norway in the city of Molde, and I think it was the third year of the Ukrainian invasion. So we were in the city hall with, let's say 500 people maybe, or a couple of hundred people.
Yeah.
And they were singing. And their mayor was there giving a speech, and to really...
Was it to commemorate the invasion and show
just
solidarity?
to show solidarity, and it was like a march through the city, and it was a solidarity.
Oh, right.
A singing Ukraine choir, and a few Norwegians as well, but mostly Ukrainians. And
is there a Ukrainian population living in Malta?
Yes, they have. Yes, we are
Refugees.
up to... Was it 800 they say in total? But
Okay.
there's more in every municipalities.
Right.
So how many I will not be able to say.
But Norway's been
Quite
generous in giving.
But we have this Nordahl Grieg, and they were reading that in Russian as well. Nordahl Grieg.
He's
What's
one
that?
of my old neighbors, or he was not one of my old neighbors from Bergen.
Yes.
Who's that?
He's an old, he's a writer. He was he wrote to ungdomen,
Yeah,
for
to the youth.
And he was killed during the war in an air raid over Germany, I think.
So he's every Norwegian child, we have to learn this. And there is a long poem, but the sentences that we kind of stick to our heart is that du skal ikke tåle så inderlig vel den urett som ikke rammer deg selv. Okay, help me a bit. You should not, maybe you can do it.
You should not tolerate the unjust that does not hit yourself.
So
it's about you're supposed to resist.
No, you're
Violence.
you're supposed to be tolerant and not accept intolerance as such.
Which is kind of what I was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Okay
it's exactly, you should react with compassion as a inborn instinct that you should not tolerate to see the suffering of others.
Other thing.
And
Shall help
and
them-
it's not,
help
it
them
doesn't
out,
hit
basically.
you yourself, but it hits someone else.
Right.
And you should not,
So you have a
Uh,
duty to protect or
yeah.
duty to care.
your duty to care.
Yeah.
I think that is, ska
It's
ikke tåle.
difficult to translate that particular.
Well, send me a. I'll write the guy's name down and do some research, and maybe we'll read it out next time because that's
Yes.
quite moving.
So that was
He's a
quite-
famous Norwegian poet.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
especially for the war, you know.
Okay.
You know
Good.
the Utøya tragedy. I think our prime minister, or that particular verse, or those particular verses were quoted by the prime minister Jens Stoltenberg after the Utøya tragedy, where this new Nazis
Killed the
killed
youth.
a lot of youth, close to 190.
Like the Social
something.
Democrat youth
Yeah.
camp,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the youth.
when that guy fired on the wall.
Yeah,
He quoted that same poem.
he didn't quote it, but the prime minister quoted
Oh, I
it.
see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah, obviously.
So,
Yes.
so you
Thank
know
you.
the. I just like to comment again, and I like to take the last book of James Lovelock.
Okay.
When he was 101 years old, he wrote the book, the human, cyberhuman.
I didn't
And-
know that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I know he just died.
Novozin.
Okay.
Yeah, but he talks about the impulse of compassion. It's like catching a ball. You don't give your instruction to your head and say, "No, the ball is coming. I have to clap my hands."
Right. It's just instinctive. You just
Yeah.
do it.
So
Yeah.
compassion. That we should mature into a civilization that has this instinct of compassion in the high-tech age.
Ah, that's interesting.
It's quite an interesting
That is
understanding.
interesting. How we can adapt the compassionate instinct into even high-tech civilization.
Yeah, that was his thing, and
Okay.
you probably
I must
met
read that book.
James
Yeah.
Lovelock. You probably
No, I
maybe-
know people who worked with him and stuff,
Yes,
but I
of
never
course.
met him myself.
How to find back to in the human passions, how to
Mm.
recover it, basically.
Yes.
I think that's
the instinct of.
Yeah.
passion.
Well, it probably doesn't surprise you to learn that Mencius, the greatest Confucian philosopher in China, ancient China, said exactly the same thing. He said there's an instinct of caring and compassion within all human beings, and that's natural. That's our natural state. He uses a different metaphor. He said if you're walking through a courtyard and you see a child hovering on the edge of a well about to fall in, you will instinctively go and bring them back from the edge. You know, you won't think about it. Oh, should I? Shouldn't I? You know,
Yes,
what colour
yes.
are they? You know, do I like them? No, you just do it. And Mencius said that proves that that compassion is instinct is inside us all, and therefore, you know, his writings are still read and studied in China to this day.
So maybe that's a part of the prayer today. That, or like, let us pray that the instinct of compassion can be increased to humans.
Thank you. That's what we aim for and hope for. Yes. Okay, let's move on now and look at the 99 Names of Peace project, which we also discussed in the meeting. So let's, Inga Meta, can you choose a number between 1 and 48, please? And we'll see what language and project come up.
I take 23.
23, okay. Right, now. Oh, good one that. 224. This is a great one. So this is a book of all the languages of the, well, key languages of the world, 99 languages. And I've given their words for